Now, one of the problems that painters like myself encounter is giving this illusion of solidity for objects we paint. It could be the human form, it could be a portrait, it could be anything at all. Everything has a form, and it's very hard for painters to give the illusion of that form. So what I propose doing today is making up a form, an organic shape out of plasticine. No, it's not plasticine, it's this. Well, as you can see, it's already quite interesting as it is. It's rather like a rock. And as you can see, the light shining on it highlights all the dips and the crevices and the bulk and the main facets of the form, which would be quite nice to paint. So I'm just going to accentuate those a bit more, give it a bit more shape, and make it into something a bit more like a sculpture, maybe something like that. Well, I'm going to start off by just roughly sketching out where the figure is going to be. So it's about that tall, and then that's about the base of it. It's going to go kind of in like that. And then this side goes out about here. Make sure it's kind of centered. So this is the basic shape. So now I'm going to talk into the mic, really. I think it's a bit easier because otherwise this would take a long time. So as you can see, what I'm trying to do is to fill in the background rather than concentrate on the figure itself. I always find that's a good thing to do because it helps you to observe the shape better by painting the negative space. But also it gets you to think about the relationship between the figure and the background as well. So maybe you'll have parts which are lighter than the background, or bits that are darker as well. So that's a nice way of integrating the foreground figure with the background. As you can see, it's quite messy to begin with. I'm just trying to observe the lighter shapes and the darker shapes. Since the form's not very clear, it's well, certainly when I was painting it, the light was slightly different. It's just quite hard to figure out what's light and what's dark. Luckily, I'm using this what's it called, bluetack, which is just one color. Obviously, if you're painting something which is multicolored, the task is even harder because it's harder to see what's actually in the light and what's in the dark. But obviously, if something's one color, like a piece of scrunched up cardboard or any material which is just one single color, it's much easier to see the light and the dark. So I'd advise you, if you're painting things from life and you're struggling to see the shape of it, just try and pick something which is just monochrome, and also paint it just with one color as I'm doing now. I'm just choosing a black because obviously it just helps me concentrate on the tonal values rather than the color and the tonal values. So you can see it every time here. I'm either working the figure or I'm working the background. I tend to work the background probably just as much as the figure because I find it helps me to bring out the form quite nicely. And every time I put on a layer of watercolor paint, it's adding to the layer underneath it, making it more opaque so less light gets through the paper and rebounds. But also when watercolour paint dries, when the water evaporates, the colour lightens a bit as well. I'm also changing brushes a bit. Sometimes I want to just give nice broad areas of wash. And other times I'm trying to sort of feel my way into different areas of the sculpted form a bit more. So I'm using a brush that doesn't hold so much water, so it's not going to go all over the place. A bit more control. Painting and drawing, what I find amazing about them is that you're learning to observe as you paint, which is nice, but unfortunately means that once you've finished, often is the moment that you can really see what the form should look like in paint. So it's a kind of process in that way. And I suppose that's why people go back to the same subjects again and again, and they kind of learn from the previous experience of painting and thus observing an object. But I am enjoying the kind of this idea of painting something which has no resemblance really to things I've painted before. It's not like painting like a portrait or a life model, because you kind of draw on your experience of, having painted lots of different noses or ears or legs or whatever. In this case, it's kind of fun because it's all the shapes are kind of novel. What you haven't seen, every now and again, when the paper gets very saturated, I will dry it with a blow dryer just to speed up the drying a bit, because otherwise I'll have a wet and wet type of effect that I don't want the whole time. So I think that's about as far as I'm going to get. What usually happens if I continue too long, I'll begin to faff about a bit and eventually ruin it. So, this has been my attempt to get some form out of this sculptural piece of bluetack. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please have a go, and if you've got any questions, you can, on the YouTube, you can write a comment, or you can look me up on Facebook, or through my website. Thank you very much. Bye for now.